very beautiful.
Mm.
I'd like to ask you, if you wish, to speak about your work as a shaman and as a magician, if those two things go together for you.
Mm. Well, I don't suppose I use the word shaman very much, and certainly don't call myself a shaman.
Yes.
Perhaps just because the word doesn't have a lot of meaning to me today. It seems to be a word that has been so popularized and almost really sold down the river by a kind of commercialism.
Yes.
I'm very aware of and have spent time with a good number of traditional magic practitioners, medicine people in different cultures around this vast world. Only a few, I must admit, of such cultures compared to the amazing diversity that one finds among indigenous, traditional peoples. But of course, the word shaman comes from a very particular form of practice endemic to some of the Siberian peoples. It has great similarities to other circumpolar tribes of the far north, and several in the east, in Mongolia as well. While I'm speaking of this, I should mention that I'm especially dismayed by the term shamanism.
Yes.
That has become such a catchword today. But I really wouldn't know what this word means. I don't know what it means, except a kind of contemporary, commercialized glop, where a form of practice, a style of magic that is so particular to each indigenous tradition, given the closeness that these traditions have to the living land that holds them, and given the diversity, the differences between northern Siberia and the Amazon rainforest, or the deserts of the American Southwest, here where I live, or the northwest coast of North America. Every indigenous oral people is in a very direct, reciprocal rapport with the living landscape that it inhabits. And these landscapes are so different from one another, and hence the forms of magic and the particular medicines that are available to a culture and that arise between that people and the local earth are unique to each culture. And I'm astonished at the way in which we've assumed that that this particular magic of the shaman is one thing that is found in the same way in every tribal culture. I don't believe it is, and I believe it does a tremendous disservice to just speak of shamanism as if it is a single body of practice that can be decontextualized from the particular cultures where these people of unique medicine practice their craft. So I would say this, that while the term shamanism makes little sense to me, also because it seems to suggest that the shaman is at the center of the tribal community. Shamanism suggests that there's a whole almost religious body of belief, a religion that almost worships the shaman, that places its focus upon the shaman. Hence, we'd call it shamanism. But anyone who has spent a long time among different indigenous peoples has discovered that the shamans or medicine people or magicians are only very rarely at the center of their communities. They don't even dwell usually within the human hubbub of the community. They're usually living out at the very edge of the community, or even beyond the boundary of the village, out among a cluster of wild boulders, or out among some wild swamps where the village people wouldn't even venture at night, because the magician's intelligence, his or her unique form of sentience, is not encompassed by the style of intelligence that's common to the human village. It can never be entirely held or circumscribed within the human styles of thought common to that culture, because the magician's place really is at the edge of the community, mediating between the human goings-on and the other-than-human, the wider-than-human community of beings within which the human community is embedded. But the shaman or the magician's particular gift, which is also a kind of curse, is to not be entirely human, or at least to have one's allegiance not so much to one's human colleagues, but to the whole more than human community of beings, the community that includes us two-leggeds, but includes also all the other walking and crawling beings that inhabit the land, and the other flapping and flying, screeching folks who swoop by overhead, and the finned peoples who live within the rivers and streams and the oceans, and but also the rooted peoples, the plants and the herbs and the forests and the mountains as well, and the rivers. These too are members of one's community if one is practicing as a magician or medicine person. The storm clouds are key, active persons, one could say, or beings who are also part of your constituency, as are the stones and the dry creek beds. Everything, to such a mindset, everything is alive, and the magicians, or the shamans, if one wishes to call them that, are those persons who are most susceptible to these other-than-human shapes of intelligence. They are those folks among us who are a little more sensitive than many of us. They're more porous, one could say. They pick up the felt sensations given off by a tree or another animal a bit more easily than those of us who are more at ease in the middle of the community. So medicine people tend not to be really at home in the human hubbub. They don't make good mayors or even chiefs of the tribe. They because they're so sensitive, their skin, one could say, is so porous that they have this uncanny kind of somatic empathy that feels something of what other bodies feel. And when they're among just other human beings whose bodies are so much like their own because they have the same shape, you pick up too easily what other people are feeling because you're so porous. People like this in our culture, you can recognize them because they tend to take on the accent of whoever they're talking to. If you're talking to someone on the phone, everybody in the room where you're sitting will know the nationality of the person you're talking to because you're speaking with a French accent. If you're talking to a Frenchman, a Russian accent. If you're talking to someone from Russia, you're very porous. People percolate through you. And a lot of people are like this, of course. It's not a tiny minority. It could be as much as 20% of the human population is such that that you're just a little too sensitive to hang out strictly with others of your own species because it blows out your circuits. You just feel what they feel all the time, and you can be sitting in a room talking to someone and in a big party even, and someone comes in who's all bummed out because they've been fired from their job, and you start feeling kind of glum and dejected without even knowing why. Or somebody enters behind you who is terribly elated because something wonderful just happened in their life, and you start feeling rather good and kind of giddy without even seeing that person. Your body picks it up from his body or from her body because you have this kind of uncanny somatic empathy. Well, this is the style of nervous system that is common to the magicians or the medicine people or the shamans of any place-based culture. And such folks tend quite naturally to gravitate toward the edge of the human community, so they're not surrounded by other two-leggeds all the time. But with one hand, they can be in relation to the human goings-on, but with the other hand, they're in relation to the forest and to all the other shapes of sensitivity and sentience that comprise the forest. And that becomes their charge within the community. Their responsibility is to tend the boundary between the human world and the more than human world, and to make sure that that boundary itself stays porous, that it stays a membrane, that it never hardens into a barrier shutting out the more than human world, but that it stays a porous membrane across which there's a two-way flow in both directions, that the human community never takes more from the land than it returns to the living land, whether with prayers or propitiations or simply praises. And many great magicians or medicine people are masters of eloquence in order to be able to offer praise regularly to the other than human shapes of life that surround us, to honor these beings with our own oral eloquence. Of course, in the modern world today, at least in the alphabetized world of the West, we don't think of these other living forms, not even the other animals, much less the plants, much less the mountains and the rivers and the winds, as being alive, as being the kinds of things that could draw you into any kind of relationship. They're just objects, complex, sometimes object, but objects nonetheless, basically passive entities automatically or mechanically doing their thing in the world. And so in the modern world, people who have that very kind of sensitivity and porousness tend not to know what to do with themselves, and they start getting in a lot of trouble. By the time they're in their mid-teenage years, often such sensitives, because they're not recognized within the culture and because they have no place, really, in a culture that defines everything that's not human as basically inert or inanimate. This kind of sensitivity is not good for anything. And so you can get locked up fairly quickly, whether in prison or in a psychiatric hospital, or you lock yourself up inside yourself,
Yes.
and then you wake up when you're 40 or 50 years old, wondering, good heavens, where have I been all my life?
Yeah.